I think it's a strong characteristic to have, to put yourself out there and try something new, even if I love seeing people like come out and running for the first time, because it's something good that they're doing for themselves. And yeah, it's not for the greater good of all humanity, but but it's something good that they're doing for themselves. And that is the same sort of bravery and strength that it takes to do advocacy, is like the strength that it takes to do something good for yourself.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Oh My Curry Goodness. My name is Hamza Islam. On each episode of this podcast, I talk to Gen Zers from different fields about their story and the experiences that have shaped them into who they are today. When it came to naming the podcast Oh My Curry Goodness, I broke it down into two parts. The first part, Oh My Goodness, comes from the fact that when we hear stories that are interesting, inspiring, shocking, whatever that may be, we say Oh My Goodness. And I added curry because as someone who is South Asian, curry, of course, is a popular dish in South Asia, so I thought, Oh My Curry Goodness would be a great podcast name. Now, obviously, my goal would one day people would say, Oh My Curry Goodness, because it'd be really cool. But more importantly, I want to create a podcast where you guys as listeners take lessons from each guest as you continue to write your own story, because storytelling is a great way to learn about failures, experiences, challenges, and it can help you become a stronger person. And I also want my podcast to be a humanistic podcast where even though all the people I've spoken to have done incredible things, that they're human beings at the end of the day. And we shouldn't focus on just who they are. We should also focus on what they are. So, which is a human being. So I hope you guys continue to check back each and every week to hear inspiring stories from those who are of the Gen Z generation. Now, this week, I am talking to Noor Abukaram, who is the founder of Let Noor Run, which is an organization that fights discrimination in sports. In 2019, after being disqualified from a high school cross-country race, despite having a personal best, Noor has been on a journey where she has been fighting for young Muslim athletes. This led her to work with an Ohio state legislator, which passed Ohio Senate Bill 181, which is a legislation that prevented states' athletic governing body from developing rules around the basis of religion. And I'm really excited as always, to be able to talk to Muslims because, as you know, I am Muslim, hence the name Hamza Islam. But nevertheless, Noor, thank you so much for joining Oh My Curry Goodness.
Hi, Hamza. Thank you for having me. This is going to be a great conversation.
Yeah, for sure. It's so great to be able to connect with you. One thing I do want to mention is that Noor, I know you're also a student at Ohio State, so we also have that Ohio State connection. Go Bucks. Um, First, I want to start by talking about religion because, as we were both Muslim, and it's weird. I always want to ask this question to people who have like a unique connection to their faith. I've had Christian guests on the podcast and Muslim guests as well, and I just want to know from your perspective. Tell me a bit about how you see religion, because one of the things I've said previously is that I feel like religion has been giving me a sense of direction. So it's like you have this like journey to life, and religion's almost like that GPS telling you where to go, what to do, what not to do. And I know that not everyone has a positive perception on religion. And I understand that people have different opinions, but as a Muslim, how do you view religion? Do you feel like it's given, or what do you feel like religion has given you? Do you feel like it's been giving you a sense of direction, or do you see it in a different way?
I see religion as giving you something. So I don't see it as something that takes anything away from me, but rather adds goodness to my life. So that's just the way that I see it. I see it as a way of life and I guess like a path to follow. But more importantly, just it's something that adds to my everyday as Noor. So I'm Noor, I wear hijab, I run, and I'm a Muslim. And that's something that I am proud to be. And it's because of what I believe it adds to my life and what it gives me on a day to day basis.
So it's interesting you brought that up. I want to ask you this, and if it's a bad question, we can cut it off because I've been wanting to ask this to so many people, but I feel like it just doesn't make sense. But I'm gonna go ahead
Mhm.
and do it.
Go ahead.
Um, so let's say you don't have religion. And obviously,
Mhm.
like I said, this is like from coming from your perspective. It's not like what you say is like the best or the wrong answer, but you take religion out of Noor's identity, what does Noor lose?
That is a really good question. I think that what does Noor lose? I don't really know how to answer this question, but the way that I see it is like I was saying, like it adds so much to my life. So I guess like what's the base that I'm at without it? I don't know. I've like this is honestly something I can't answer. Alhamdulillah, I was born Muslim. I've had religion with me my entire life. And and everyone has a journey, but alhamdulillah it's been a positive in my life. And so like even thinking about like what I would lose without religion is something that I can't like fathom because it's become a part of my like lifestyle. Like I couldn't just the way that you act, the way that you talk to people, the way that you carry yourself, the way you dress, the way like smiling is sunnah. And every single time I smile, I think about that. Like this is sunnah. So it's all a part of religion. Or if you think about even just the way that like people talk to each other, like gossiping, like it's such a part of our life and our everyday life. But I try my best not to gossip. Why? Because it's not, it's frowned upon in our religion. So it's like so just taking those, and those are just things that I've seeped into my everyday life and it's just become habits to me, but also understanding that this is for the sake of Allah. And I think that I don't like if I was gonna lose religion, then whose sake am I doing it for?
It's like that sense of purpose almost.
It's that sense of purpose, and I'm doing it for the sake of Allah. I act my best every day for the sake of Allah. So yeah, it's a tough question to answer because it's not something I've ever had experience with. And I'm sure other people have totally different answers than I do. But for me, it's it's a love that I have. I have a lot of love for Islam, and I couldn't imagine not having that.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. And it is, like I said, it's definitely this question could be answered in different ways for different
Yeah.
people. I've had a guest who was like a uh, born again Christian, I think that's the term, where it's like she didn't really like she was Christian, but she didn't really follow it. But then once she got more involved, she was like, "Oh wow, religion has opened up in ways that I never would have." So again, it goes back to like you said, it goes from different person to person. So,
Mhm.
but I do appreciate what you said because I think it's really interesting. Um, one thing I want to talk about, obviously you are proud to be Muslim, as I am as well, but you are also very proud of wearing the hijab. And I remember getting ready for this article, and I'm looking at my notes. You said in an article on ESPN that you would never let your hijab be why you couldn't do something, including being an athlete.
Mhm.
And I would love to know, I kind of want to bring that, what do you lose in religion, or what if you lose religion, what do you lose? I want to kind of ask you a similar question, which is, what is there a difference in personality characteristic between Noor with a hijab versus Noor without one? Like, do you feel a certain way, or do you feel like you feel the same way regardless? Because like you mentioned that it's a huge part of your identity. So what kind of like what's some of the differences if you don't have that, if that makes sense?
So again, like this is another question that I can't fully answer for you. My mom is a convert. You can ask her that question. She went through a large part of her life not wearing the hijab. I started wearing the hijab very young. And so I couldn't really answer that. Like, who am I without the hijab? But do I think that anybody is any less without the hijab or any different necessarily without the hijab or actually physically wearing the hijab? No, I don't think so. I don't think that it makes an athlete more of an athlete or makes an athlete less of an athlete. And that's what I was getting at with that quote, is that I'm not any less of a person in this space than you are because I wear a hijab. And this person, this other person, whoever they may be, is not anything more or less in this space because they do or do not wear hijab, or any characteristic really. Like every people have these like character waves, I feel like. And it's like they may excel in this one and then they de-excel in this one. So that's the way that I like view characteristics in hijab and, personalities. I guess the whole scope of this question is that nobody's nobody's the same everywhere. Everybody is growing in different waves and are in different parts of their journey.
Yeah, and it goes back to the fact that we're all human beings at the end of the day, and we all have it's like it's definitely a journey. Um, Now I want to go transition into the idea of advocacy because this is something that you've been fighting for since from that time when you were disqualified, and it's it's a question I've been asking a lot of people, especially involved in advocacy, because the one thing that people will never understand is like your personal motivation. Because people might look someone, people from like an outsider could look at the things that you do and go, "Why are you doing the things that you're doing?" And even though you have this good intention, it's like you sometimes will have this bit of confusion. And so I want to ask you, when it comes to being an advocate and fighting for young Muslim athletes, what how do you know that you're doing the right thing? Because again, it goes back to intentions. Like you know what you're worth, and that you know that you're doing is good, but sometimes either if it's coming from something inside of yourself or if it's coming from other people, you just have this feeling of like, am I doing the right thing? Or what if like all of this could what if everything that I'm trying to do may not mean anything, if that makes sense.
I feel like, hmm, sorry, just give me one moment. You can probably like edit this part out or something. I don't know. Um, this is, I think it goes back to, I guess, a confidence thing and a support thing. And I think that if you have the support to be able to have you and help you understand that what you're doing is worth it, or if you like see that, the growth come out of what you're doing, even if it's just like one person, and to me that's so special, then then I think that it is worth it. It probably does boil down to a confidence thing, or like, especially being young, like, do I belong in this space is something that I think is like a bigger question that I ask myself more than is it worth it. And I think at the end of the day, after talking to people that are older than me, after talking to mentors, it's an understanding that you do belong in this space and that hijabis belong in this space of advocacy. Young people belong in this space of advocacy. If we've learned anything in the last few months, is that young people do belong in advocacy, and it's probably our strongest suit. And yeah, I don't think that I would ever like, yeah, I couldn't imagine me being like it wasn't worth it, because I'm a person that's very much like everything happens for a reason. Allah has a plan for me. So everything is worth it. And it all leads to a greater outcome and a greater plan that hopefully will unfold, inshallah.
For sure. Before we continue on talking about advocacy, so my friend of mine just told me that I want to ask you a couple of sports related questions. So you're very passionate about running, but I also saw that you also played soccer growing up, and I've had athletes on the podcast, and we've talked a bit about like life skills when it comes to different sports, because it feels like people don't understand that even though like soccer is more than just kicking a ball into a goal, running is more than just running. There are certain things that you can learn from them that can help you in your personal journey. So I want to ask you, because I love asking these types of questions, especially to athletes. Like, what are some things you've learned from soccer and running that you feel like you have applied in your personal life, not just in sports, but more of just like Noor as a human being?
Mhm. So doing sports growing up was probably the best thing my parents ever did for me. One of the best things. They've done a lot for me, alhamdulillah. But one of the best things they've ever done for me is putting me in athletics and never letting me have a season off. I was like a dual sport athlete. I tried every single sport down to I did broom ball, if you even know what that is. I did broom ball in high school. So I tried everything, and I was always very busy with sport. And so it was one of those things that, it gave me, first of all, it gave me like this place to let out adrenaline and be like, hyper and do that. But then it also gave me this like responsibility and these other people in my life that aren't a part of my personal life, that I have to respect and listen to and understand teamwork. I've had countless coaches over the years, and I can tell you a thing that I've learned from every single one of them, good or bad. So I always like keep track of them, and just like understanding that these are people in my life that have helped me grow. You know what I mean? So I have my parents, I have my grandparents. You have like your normal people that help you grow, and then your coaches are on a whole nother level. So that's something that sports gave me, that I wouldn't trade for the world. And I think every child should do that. You know what I mean? At any level. And I think youth sports should be accessible to all, because it gives so much positive into a child's life. And as for running versus soccer, so I played soccer my whole life. I started running so I could be like faster in soccer, if that makes any sense. I was a sprinter. And so I didn't really see much in running in the beginning. I was like, I'm just sprinting so I can be like super fast on the soccer field. So in soccer, it's this high like pace game. It's a lot of fun. You have to use your brain a lot. You can't really slow down. Like your brain is always working, always moving. Whereas once I got into distance running, I found this like peace and calm that I honestly didn't find until I got to college. Until I was in college and I started to go on longer runs by myself without like teammates or anything. Like I do a lot of solo runs, and I found this like calm and peace in these moments that I can either shut my brain off and enjoy the high, or turn my brain on and think through everything that went on that day or that week or that month during that run. And so it's really nice because you get these options. Whereas in soccer, you can't think. Like you need to be thinking about the game or you will miss out. So it's like these two very different spaces, and I love both of them. But what I found was like this beautiful balance that it gives me being a distance runner while also being a person that loves to play soccer. So I was like given these two different things, and I love both. I will say that I found in running that I could, do sprints and get that same sort of like adrenaline rush. Not the same. Not, I don't think anything matches the sort of adrenaline rush that you get like during a soccer game.
Mm.
But just you get an adrenaline rush. You can get it while running, and the runner's high is unmatched. So
Yeah. I growing up, I was a big soccer fan, and I'd say even today, my favorite sport is soccer. And what I'd say is, yeah, it's everything you say is true. Like you can't think about anything else because if you do, you're gonna get scored on. Um, and so it's a really fast paced game, but I also feel like it's a game similar to like, and I don't know. I mean, I'm not a runner, but I would say it's a fast paced game, but it also teaches you the idea of patience, just because soccer normally is like a 90-minute game, but instead of looking at it as like 90 or potentially 120 minutes, if we're talking like those tournaments, kind of like break it down into different increments so it doesn't feel as daunting. So that's kind of how I see soccer. I'm curious to know, because I know you don't run professionally, but I know that you have participated in different marathons and events.
Mhm.
Has there ever been a part of you, whether it's soccer or running, that where you thought like I would love to compete at a professional level, or you thought like this was a possibility? Because for me, that dream died when I was 13. What happened was like I think as a 13-year-old they put me in an under 10 team because they didn't have room for me, and I was just like, I can't do this. I'm done. But for
Yeah.
you, given how much sports has played a part of you, was there a part that you thought maybe you could take either soccer or running into a professional level?
I don't think I was ever that good, but I love playing soccer. If I could play that for the rest of my life, I would. The adrenaline rush is unmatched, and coming into college knowing that I wasn't going to be on a team was one of the most like daunting things for me, because couldn't imagine life without soccer. It could just because I just love the feeling that I get playing it. Honestly, I haven't played in a minute. I should probably like go and play. I need to find people to play with. Anyways, I'll play with my cousins back home, but then when I'm in Columbus, I'm like, oh, who wants to play with me? But that's like so off topic. But I like always there was a point in my life I couldn't imagine life without soccer. But then I feel like running sort of like filled this. Running professionally is so unattainable, but but I want to keep running, and I don't see myself stop running anytime soon. I have this goal of finishing 6 world major marathons. So there's six. I've done three. I've done Chicago, London, and New York. And then the other three that I need is Berlin, Tokyo, and Boston. So one of my big goals is to BQ. I've never even told that really, but that's one of my big goals in marathon running is to like Boston qualify, which you need a certain time to qualify for the Boston Marathon. So, I have these goals. They're not to run professionally or anything like that, but definitely um to like continue running and to excel and get better and feel that high of getting better. Also, I feel like when I think about running professionally or whatever, it's like having a team again or having a coach again. And what I found in the running community is that it's so like you can make your own team. And I have a coach, but like really like building a team is one of my, because that's what I got most from sport, is having teammates and accomplishing things together. Through the good and the bad, you accomplish it at the end of the day. And I think that's what I've found in running, is being able to find community. There's this community called the Muslim Runners. You can find them on Instagram, but Muslim Runners is a community that was started by Harun Mota, and it's runners all over the world, and it's probably like over 100 people in this WhatsApp group, and we all just talk about running all day long. And I had the pleasure to meet them in London, and it felt like these are my teammates. This is my running community, and that's one of the most beautiful things about running, is that you can find community in it.
For sure. Now, I want to go back to advocacy because obviously you're very passionate about running and marathons. Let's talk about the marathon and advocacy because um, I mentioned Senate Bill 181, and that was passed, but it definitely took a journey in time. But one of the things that I think I didn't notice until I've met with so many people, which is when it comes to, I guess, like common sense goals or common sense issues, like you feel like it's one of those things where it's like we should get this done as soon as possible, but then it takes some time. And so I guess what I want to ask you is how do you prepare for that kind of marathon? Because running marathon, obviously you obviously that's with your legs. But but with advocacy, I feel like there's the physical part of you that you have to prepare for, and then there's also the mental part because I think as so many people we want to get things done quick, but then when we see that it takes so much time, it's like, oh, how long do we got to keep doing this? And we can easily just like give up. But you were someone that even though that Senate or that legislative journey had its own ups and downs, you were still determined. So how do you prepare for that kind of marathon, the advocacy part?
I think the biggest thing is, I'm going to mention this again, is to build your team, which if you can see, like we're talking about what athletics gives you in life, like I will always build a team first before I start anything. Who's going to help me and where can they help me? And I feel like that's been my biggest thing when it comes to advocacy, is having mentors and having people that are just as passionate as I am in excelling with this mission. So that's how you prepare, is getting a team together. I was 16 when all this happened. I didn't know anything. You know what I mean? I was like, but I had people around me, people that were older than me, that assured me and made sure and told me that it's okay and all this. And I didn't fully understand this mission until I was out of high school, in college, and the bill passed. And that's when I fully understood what this mission is for. And And it was, I don't know if it was because this was such a long time coming, or it just comes with maturity and like getting out of different spaces and going into different spaces. But I definitely like preparing for it. It just comes from sitting down with yourself, resetting your intentions, having your team, make sure your team all has their intentions straight. And then I think that you can take it on, and it'll be okay. It's been a while, and sometimes I get tired and I'm like, man, I'm gonna tell this story again. Like, really, you want me to tell this story again? And I think that when I sit down with myself and I remember my intentions and who I'm doing this for, um, it's easy. It's easy to tell the story again. It's easy to do the work, because when you love something, it feels like it's easy to do it sometimes.
Yeah, I see what you mean. And bef- I want to talk about Let Noor Run, but I want to talk about teamwork because there well, let's use soccer for example because that's a great example. There are many teams that have great players, but they don't but it's more like an individual base, but not as a teamwork base. So even though you're not a soccer team, I want to ask what makes a good team? Because forget the sports part. I mean, obviously, I know when we think of teams, we think of sporting events, but just in general, you could a team is needed for a lot of things. But if you were to if someone were to ask what makes a good team, how would you answer that?
I would say accountability and leadership, I think, make two really good teams. If you have someone holding you accountable, or you have people holding you accountable, and you hold each other accountable as a team to get things done, then you'll have a pretty strong team from that, I think.
Well, let's talk about a team that well, you have your personal team, but let's talk about another incredible team slash organization, Let Noor Run, and I hopefully that was a great transition.
That was good.
Um, when I first met you, we talked a bit about what are some of your biggest fears when it comes to being an advocate, and I want to ask you um, that the pressure you have when it comes to serving as an inspiration, because of the story, the journey that you had being disqualified, and then you don't want to race without your hijab because that's such an important part of you. There's so many people who are going to have similar stories, and I know you've mentioned that in the past that there are people who have been in those same shoes. But with Let Noor Run, how much pressure do you put on yourself when it comes to that inspiration part? Because you want to do good, but then there's nothing worse than trying to do good, but then the execution part, I guess, like fails. Like, for example, the pressure I put on my podcast is significant because I'm the type of person that's like, I really want to ask those deep questions, like those really personal questions. But then in my head, it makes sense. But then when I execute it, it's like I'm off the mark. So, in terms of inspiration, you have a great mind or intention, but then there's always that concern of if I execute it, I might mess up in one way.
I guess I'm pretty slow to execute things. If you ask me, if you ask anyone, like I I go very slow. And I think when it comes to executing a plan or having a plan, I have people in my sister. If I mention to her I want to do something, she's like immediately done it. Book the flight. Like, I'm coming. What do you need? All this. Like, she is very much like right away, let's do it. Whereas I'm like, let me like write it out. Let me talk to 10 million people about it. Let me see if it's a good idea. So I guess I take my time in that sense. I guess like a good example of that is, it feels like so long ago, but when I was making the decision of whether or not to tell my story, it took me like a good 3 days to make that decision. I got disqualified on a Saturday. I had a soccer game the next day. That was Sunday. And then Monday rolled around. I was just talking to my mom, talking to everyone about it, trying to figure out what I felt. And then Tuesday is when like I was like, okay, just do it. But if I was thinking too much, I'm an overthinker, I think. But if I was thinking too much about it, I probably would have never told the story. And so I feel like having people in your life, like my sister, actually, I will just backtrack. My sister, when I was trying to decide whether or not I was going to tell this story, she's the one that told me, she was like, "No, you don't really have a choice." She was like, "We have a younger sister who wants to wear hijab, who's gonna play sports because we all play sports, and she is, you have to do it for her." So I had to just put everything I was feeling aside, put any doubts, any thoughts that I had aside, and say, "Okay, you're right." And I feel like that's been reflected over the past 4 years, and really anything that I've done. I've always had my older sister next to me and just being like, "Dude, just like pull the trigger and do it." And I think it's a good thing to have someone like that in your corner. Someone that's like, you can do it. And if it messes up, it messes up. And like, it's okay. It's a learning experience. Everything happens for a reason. My mom tells me that all the time because I'm always thinking, I'm like, I don't know. She's like, "No, everything happens for a reason." And so just taking a step back and just doing it, I think is probably like the best thing that you can do in advocacy. But also, like, I think that's why maybe me and my sister make a good team, because I'm someone that likes to think things out. She's more like, "Let's do it." So it makes a good team to have two people like that, to like, have both. So you're not sitting there with something that you're like, "I really want to do this for years," and then you never do it. So you need to have those champions in your life.
Yeah, it's when you said everything happens for a reason. I remembered I had someone else say like that's like their life motto. Like
It's
everything
my life
happens for a
motto.
reason. Wow. Oh my gosh. That's so funny. But yeah, one of the things that, like you said, if it fails, or you fail, or if it messes up, accept it and grow. I think it's one of my biggest fears with the podcast, or just I think anyone can easily have this fear, and I'm sure you've had it at some point, which is that fear of failure, because you come in and you're like you're excited, or you have this what's the word I'm looking for, like this ambition to attack, even though that's probably not the best word, but you have this ambition to just like do something, but then the moment you mess up, you start worrying about what's the worst possible thing that can happen. You start questioning yourself,
Yeah.
and it's like you're not really helping yourself. But at the same time, I feel like, I mean, life is a learning experience, and I just lost my trail of thought, so I'm gonna have to find
That's okay.
a. But no, I was gonna say, like, it's a learning experience, and just know that you are in a way, like, you still have like your own superpowers, if you will, because like people could say like, "Oh, you failed," but there's a good chance that they are probably not at your level, or they will, if they were to try to do what if they were to try to do 1% of what you do, I think they would fail even worse, if that makes sense. So I don't know, treat everything like a learning experience, and don't let anything
I
negative
couldn't
or
imagine
positive.
anyone coming up to me and being like, "Oh, you failed." I would be so taken aback by that, or even if someone like insinuated that. And I couldn't imagine saying that to anyone that has tried to do something and put themselves on the line. So I don't know. I think it makes, and I think it's a strong characteristic to have, to put yourself out there and try something new, even if it's, I love seeing people like come out and running for the first time, because it's something good that they're doing for themselves. And yeah, it's not for the greater good of all humanity, but like, but it's something good that they're doing for themselves. And that is the same sort of bravery and strength that it takes to do advocacy, is like the strength that it takes to do something good for yourself.
For sure. A couple of questions before I let you go. The first one, I think during this conversation, you come across as a very fearless person, like you're not afraid, which which I feel like I've struggled with this. Like there are certain things where I'm like, there are times where I'm more feared, or I think I'm more fear. No, I'm scared of a lot of things. That Let's just put it that way. But if there are a few things that you are scared of, what are some things that you're scared of that you hope to overcome in the future? And more specifically, I've said this, and I want to be consistent. So I am scared of spiders, but I don't mean like those kinds of fears, but the type of fears where it's like, that once you overcome them, then you see like a new, then it's this is like almost in a way holding you back from being your best self. So for example, I've been trying to overcome this in my personal life, which is the fear of talking to people, which ironic because I host a podcast, but with podcasting, you have an idea of what to talk about. But when you're meeting people like just casually, there's no real plan. So now I'm like, I don't know what to say. I'm actually like nervous. Usually I'm quiet, but I'm podcasting. I'm like, I try to be as interactive as possible, but I hope to overcome that fear of casual talking just because I feel like there's so much you can learn from people off the podcast. So for you, obviously you come across as a very I'm not like I'm not I don't I hope I don't offend you when I say this, but it's like you're like it seems like you're the type of person like where you're like you are ambitious, you're not afraid of to fail, you're not afraid of X, Y, and Z. But if there are some things that you feel like are holding you back and you're a bit scared of, what are some fears that you hope to overcome in the future?
Man, okay. I would say that I'm glad you think of me that way. I think like I speak things into existence and like I'm not scared. I do believe I hold this very close to my heart is doing things for the sake of Allah and not fearing anything but Allah. And I my parents have always said that to me, and I think that if you hold that close to your heart, then it's much easier to not be afraid with or to not care what people think about you or because these are thoughts of course that I've had. You know what I mean? Of course I've worried about what people think about me. When I was like first telling my story, one of my biggest things, I don't know why I was so scared what my teammates would think if I told this story, you know, um or even when well, I guess we are talking about like the fear of failure. I remember in the beginning steps when I was like telling the story, I was almost like afraid like what if I don't do anything to change this and I'm just telling this story. And then once you realize the power of storytelling and dialogue, which I realized after the bill was passed, then that fear kind of goes away, that fear of like telling your story, because there's a lot of power in your voice. And I found that. And so when it comes to Let Noor Run or to like my everyday life as a college student, I'm a fashion major. So when it comes to just like you have like shutting down, I just shut them down. I shut them down so hard, because I'm like, no, this is something that I want to do. This is something that I'm passionate about. And when it comes to your passion and when it comes to wanting to do something and not wanting to like look back one day and say like, man, I should have done that. Then you have to put your fears aside and just do things for the sake of Allah and no one else, because it's all those other people. It's all the people and outside factors that add on to those fears, I feel like. So I don't know. I definitely have a lot though, because I'm at the end of the day, like I'm 20 years old in college. I moved here 3 years ago. It's a city I don't know. So like, yeah, of course I'm scared, but just like putting it to rest and getting things done is I guess like what my like thing has been. Like I just need to get things done and do things for the sake of Allah. Fear no one but Allah. I don't know if you know that like Native Dean song, but what is that? I'm not afraid to stand alone. So it's like kind of like that. Like Allah's always with me. Um, so yeah, shout out to Native Dean. I don't know.
I love to see that. There is you mentioned the idea of passion, and I think that's an interesting thing, which is like the idea of following your passion and not letting anything stop you. But I also think that I've asked this question a lot. It's one of my favorite questions, which is like there's a difference between passion. Passion almost stems from like a want in a way, where it's like you want to do this versus you have to do this. For example, like there's a difference between saying I want to become a doctor and I have to become a doctor, because I feel like the have to feel like there's like some sort of pressure. But there's two. I want to ask you two advice questions, and they'll be the last ones before we wrap up. But the first one is, what's the most important advice you've received when it comes to following your passion? So for me, when I started this podcast in 2023, obviously in 2022, I started thinking about like, what are the types of questions I should ask? What are the types of people I should bring in? And I remember I asked a friend of mine who has a podcast. He has a successful podcast. I asked him what's like the best piece of advice, and he's like, it's going to take time. And I'm like, no, it's not going to take time. This is going to be great. I'm going to have so much fun. And I do have fun with all my interviews, but like in terms of growing the podcast, he was right when he said that it takes time to grow something. So that's from a podcast perspective. But when it comes to passion, what's like the most important advice you've received when it comes to following your passion?
So I think that it's passion and purpose. So if you like hold those hand in hand, then following your passion will be, I guess, easier, and you'll love it more. And or I mean, if it's your passion, you love it, right? But if you understand that this is my purpose, I am here to do this. And it's hard to evaluate that. Like, how the heck do you evaluate what your purpose is? But for me, it's like, yeah, it's gonna change probably. People evolve, I evolve, you know what I mean? The world is gonna evolve. But for right now, and when I was 16 and starting this, I understood that we're gonna go back to it again. Everything happens for a reason. And I understood that when I got disqualified, it potentially starts something. It happened for a reason. And maybe that's my purpose, you know? And so you just follow that fearlessly, and with everything you got, you just you grab onto something, you say, okay, like, I'm an older sister, and I don't think that that's out of, like, it's not an accident that I'm an older sister. You know what I mean? So I'm an older sister and I have a younger sister. And that's a part of my identity as well. And a part of my purpose is to pave a way. And so yeah, I think that if you hold purpose and passion hand in hand, and because I think purpose is a much more powerful word than passion is. And if you can try and sit there and understand, like, what is your purpose, then and you'd be able to carry on and understand the journey that you're going on. And I agree with the other person that was on this podcast, that it does take time, and it takes time to understand, like, if your passion is your purpose, you know what I mean? And it takes time to, like, takes a lot of time to sit with yourself, maybe go on some long runs and really just, like, understand, like, is this right?
My last question. So one of the most common questions I usually hear on podcasts is they'll ask their guests if what advice would they give their younger self. I want to ask you a different question, and if this fails, as we mentioned, let it fail. But um, I think throughout our journey, sometimes we say things like we can be our best friends, but we can also be our worst enemies. And so sometimes there'll be things where you say something to yourself that you thought would make you feel better, but it ended up making you feel worse. So I want to ask you, what was something that you told yourself in the past that you regret saying because you thought it made you feel better, but it ended up making you feel worse?
This is a tough question to answer because I live by everything happens for a reason. So it's tough to think that, like, it was a mistake to say that to myself. I will tell you a motto that I had going into the New York City Marathon, and it was "I'm strong." And it was "I'm strong." I lived with that. If you don't know, the New York City Marathon has a lot of hills. It's it's like known for the hills. And I would go up every single one of those hills thinking, I'm strong, I'm strong, I'm strong. And it's something that I told myself for a really long time. And I told myself it through the New York City Marathon, the Chicago Marathon, and the London Marathon. And it's become my motto for marathons because I believe it goes hand in hand with my advocacy. It's the same strength that I use in advocacy to get through a marathon. That's what I kind of equate it to. But I don't regret it. I don't regret telling myself I'm strong in moments of weakness. I don't and I couldn't imagine myself telling me I'm weak. Maybe I guess I regret any negative self-talk I've ever had during a marathon or during a long run because it actually fully affects you. If I'm running a long run and I'm like, I'm tired, oh, that run is over. And I'm a big let me tell you a little story. Actually, you can cut this out if you want, but let me tell you a little story. My we used to run the beep test in high school, And there's this girl on my team, and she would run this beep test talking to herself. Okay. She was like, you got this. You can do this out loud. Okay. And it's the first time I've ever seen anything like this. I was like, what is she doing? And I was a freshman. She was like a junior, and she was like screaming. She was like, you got this. You can do this, to herself, not to anyone else. Okay. And, ever since that day, I was like, you know what? I'm going to start doing that. I'm going to start screaming at myself on these tough days and be like, you're strong, Noor. Like, you can literally do this. Like, stop. You can do this. And the minute you let that negative self-talk steep in, it could be bad. It's not good. So, but regret saying, I don't know. I can't really think about that.
No, that's a great answer. And I'm definitely gonna do that in my personal life, where it's like when I feel like I can't do it, I'm just gonna be like, nope, I got this. I got this.
Yeah, and it feels silly. It feels so silly, especially because actually, I mean, nobody cares what you're doing during a marathon because everybody's exhausted. But I will say it out loud during the marathon because you're at this point where your body's exhausted and you can't, if you don't even have the mental capacity to be like, wait, I need to say this in my mind. But I'm yelling, I'm like, Noor, you got this. You got this, Noor. And nobody cares. Literally nobody cares. Or even in the gym when you're trying to like lift something a little heavier than you're used to. She's like, you got this. It's okay. It's okay. I tell myself that a lot. It's okay. It's okay. Keep going. So yeah, through everything, actually, not even just sport related, through everything. I'm studying right now. It's like that time of semester when you're just doing way too much studying. But even then I'm like, it's okay, Noor. It'll pass. You got this. It's fine. So
Yeah, well, I'll say, yeah, you're you're so spot on, which is that this idea of this positive self-talk doesn't just apply to sports, but it can apply to anything because you have your challenges, whether it's in sports or anything, but just remind yourself that you got this, and don't be afraid of if people say things, if people take it the wrong way, because they don't understand your personal motivations. I know you are a busy person with Let Noor Run, and obviously because we're recording this during a time where there's a lot of midterms for some reason. Come on, Ohio State. But Noor, nevertheless, thank you so much for joining the podcast. Thank you for being a great example for Muslim athletes in general. We don't usually see a lot of Muslim athletes, so seeing people like you not just involved in sports, but in advocacy is so great to see. So thank you so much for joining the podcast. Best of luck with Let Noor Run, and with all the races that you plan on running in the future. And I hope we get to meet in person someday.
Thank you. Inshallah, we will. I mean, we might run into each other on campus. You don't know, but thank you so much for having me. It was my pleasure. Alhamdulillah. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. If you guys like what you saw, be sure to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow us on Instagram at the OMCG Podcast for more information on guests, preview clips, and more. Please continue to support this podcast in the future, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next episode.